global macro investor.
And you were one of the few managers to foresee the great financial crisis.
Yes, and so right now we're very excited about AI, and we should be very excited because it's going to be revolutionary changes, but it's creeping into almost everything. The way I look at it is I look at the human body, and I see like it's replacing the body and so on. And then it replaces some aspects of the mind, levels of thinking and reasoning. But at the same time, we have another problem that's exists with geopolitics. I mean, China is a larger trading partner with most countries than the United States is.
And that's a changing of the world order.
That is one of the ingredients, right? And then also you've got large wealth gaps. The government don't have enough money. And so when you have the downturn, then you have people at each other's throats.
So a lot of people, they're thinking about how to sort of secure their future. How do they all prepare?
Let me say that history has shown that it's not the most intelligent people that are the most successful. But the key thing to keep in mind is
We should talk about it because people are talking about it a lot right now, which is or Bitcoin. What's your perspective on Bitcoin? I know the market in Bitcoin is down at the moment.
I have about 1% of my portfolio in Bitcoin because there's different kinds of money. And the money that you can't print, that's one kind. This is the other kind of money that you can't print.
Gold.
Yeah. You cannot crack it with technology. You can hold it. You own it. There's a saying that it's the only financial asset that is not somebody else's liability. Somebody has to give you something for it. It has that. So in my category of wanting, let's say, make sure that I have some hard money, which for most people should be between 5 and 15% of their portfolio, I prefer that. I'm pointing to the gold bars here rather than the Bitcoin.
Is it still, in your view, a gold-like asset?
Yes, it's a type of money that can't.
وممكن نتكلم بس اللي هو بايزد شويه علشان الناس اللي هي من عشاق الكريبتو والبيتكوين وكده علشان ما تتاثروش برايه قوي. ليه؟ علشان هو كان من 5 سنين بالظبط هو كان معارض اصلا ان في حاجه اسمها بيتكوين، يعني كان شايف اللي هي حاجه لا تساوي شيء، ليس لها قيمه من الاخر. طب امتى البرسبكتيف بتاعه اتغير؟ لما عرف الميكانيكس اللي وراها، لما عرف ان هي نادره وعرف ان ليها يوتيليتي او استخدام. واقرب مثال خالص اللي حصل في 2026 الحرب اللي بين امريكا واسرائيل وايران لما هم قفلوا المضيق بتاع هرمز. ايران طلبت الفلوس بتاعتها ازاي؟ لما هي حطت رسوم على السفن، طلبت الفلوس بتاعتها مش دولارات، ان هي تدفع لها بالبيتكوين. ليه؟ علشان ما فيش حد قادر ان هو يتحكم فيها، ما حدش ان هو يقدر يعمل لها فريزنج او يجمد الفلوس وياخد الفلوس دي من ايران، عشان لو اتدفعت لها بالدولار الفيدرالي ممكن يطلع يوم عامل فريزنج للفلوس اللي هي اتطبعت دي. السيريال نمبر اللي موجود على الدولار ممكن يوم قايل لك خلاص الفلوس دي اتحرقت اتجمدت، يعني ما عادش حد يقدر ان هو يستخدمها. لكن البيتكوين ما حدش يقدر يجمدها وما حدش يقدر يتتبعها او يسرقها. وطبعا السنين الجايه والعقود الجايه هنشوف بقى البيتكوين هتوصل لفين، سواء ان هي هتبقى شكل من اشكال الفلوس ممكن ينتهي زي زمان لما كانوا بيستعملوا الملح والصدف كفلوس وما عادوش دلوقتي بيستعملوها كفلوس، او ان هي تكبر ويبقى في ناس اكتر بتستخدمها كنوع من انواع الفلوس. فانا حبيت اوقف في الحته دي علشان افهمك برضو الهيستوري فيها، ان ري داليو كان اصلا رافضها في الاول، بس بعد ما فهم الميكانيكس بتاعتها وان هي مصنوعه ازاي بدا ان هو نوعا ما يزود الجزء بتاعها في البورتفوليو. يعني هو بيقول لك انا حاطط 1% ده مبلغ يعني نسبه كبيره، ان هو يكون حاطط 1% من البورتفوليو بتاعه في البيتكوين. وطبعا هو بيقارنها بالذهب علشان برضو هم طلعوا بعد بقى ما كان قبل كده بيحاربوها، وترامب قام طلع قام قايل خلاص احنا الكريبتو دي هنعمل لها ادوبشن، او اللي هو خلاص هنبدا نستخدم التقنيات الجديده بتاعه البلوك تشين وهكذا. بداوا يقارنوا البيتكوين بالذهب. ليه؟ عشان الاثنين نادرين، فبداوا يسموها سبيكيوليتيف اسيت او اصل معمول للمضاربه مش للاستثمار، للمضاربه. زي لما احنا كنا بنتكلم ان مفيش حاجه اسمها استثمر في ذهب، الذهب نوع من انواع الفلوس، فهو سبيكيوليتيف اسيت، يعني انت عشان تكسب منه لازم تضارب في الحركه السعريه بتاعته، تكسب من المضاربه فيه مش من الاستثمار فيه. فالبيتكوين هم بيقارنوها دلوقتي بالذهب.
Be printed, but there are technologies that can hurt it. In other words, if there's quantum computing and it can be monitored by governments and so on, it could be taxed. And digital currencies are somewhat similar.
But you don't like Bitcoin as much as gold because of privacy reasons as well.
And when the governments say, I don't want it, they have the power, therefore, to do whatever they want with it. And central banks will not own any significant amount of that because of the reason I said. They want their transactions to be private and in their control. Think about how different it would be for Russia. Okay, they confiscated these kind of other assets. They didn't get these.
Gold.
Okay, gold. And so what you're seeing, even particularly in this time of conflict, is that there's a sense that if I'm holding this, others won't get it.
You mentioned a second ago the impact you think AI is going to have on the economy broadly, but also again to real people's lives. There's lots of debate. I mean, there's been a debate over the last 10 years or so within the world of AI. You had the big AI CEOs originally saying that AI would cause job disruption, and that, you've even had some of the CEOs more recently saying work will become optional in a world of superintelligence. At the same time, we have robotics coming over the horizon. So you've got this sort of convergence of intelligence, and then, I don't know, you could think of it like muscles, like physical muscles or ability. At the same time, we're seeing AI accelerate in its capabilities. What does this mean for the average person and their job, and who's going to benefit from this AI revolution in your point of view?
It means that you will either be cutting edge and capable, and among that top fraction of a percent down to 10% of the population who is cutting edge and using it and accelerating, or you will, if you're in a thinking job, be at risk of being replaced. We're coming into a world where we can automate everything. The evolution of man was, we had the agricultural era, and there was no real inventiveness. And then man invented the machine. And what the machine did is it replaced man's physical necessity. So men used to be like oxen in the agricultural field and so on, and they were replaced by tractor. And then we entered the industrial age. First, you had the printing press that allowed people to learn, and then you had these inventions, the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, and what you had is the replacing the physical that man would do in factories then and so on. And so the way I look at it is I look at the human body, and I see like it's replacing the body and so on, and it's coming up higher and higher, and then it replaces some aspects of the mind that you can computerize, and it's coming up, and it's replacing higher and higher levels of thinking and reasoning. Okay, so that path is part of the evolutionary path that is happened. Okay, so then you start to say, what do I have to offer? And so in answer to who benefits from it, those who benefit from it are those who are the capitalists with the ideas that replace the workers. And so if you look at, there's revenue for businesses. When you buy something in a store, there's revenue. Okay. And if you look at the share that is going to workers, you see that share going down. And if you look at the share that's going to those who own that business, that share is going up. That's, how do they share that revenue in terms of the cost? And you see that that's rising. And so this is an evolutionary process. And it's true that what happens is you get more free time. Okay. So now the society has to think, how do I deal with this? So for example, the work week, which used to be, a 60 or 70-hour work week, goes down to less than a 40-hour work week, and there's more time. But there needs to be, how do you create a bottom? And so we're going through this phase in which there is this upper end that is making incredible amounts of wealth, as we described, and then this lower end that is then having these challenges. We have a relatively good economy, and the difficulty of college graduates to get employment has increased significantly. And I can tell you that in many businesses, it becomes more of a pain in the neck to have a college graduate, let's say, do it. You have to train them, and many of those tasks, many of that thing can be done very quickly with the AI and with computerization. And as you get into robotics, you're going to have that happen, right?
The speed of the disruption that we're seeing because of the amount of capital that's flowing into these AI frontier models like the Anthropics and OpenAI, et cetera, is quite different from anything else, sort of the historical precedences we've seen through the Industrial Revolution, where it took time to build the tractors.
There's an element of speed. What happens usually is the bubble bursts, and now you have the cyclical dynamic of that while the technology, evolves. But the supply, demand, and the debt problem that we just talked about then come in. And so unemployment is due to typically some sort of a combination of a financial crisis that, like we talked about, the debt and stocks going down and people not having collateral and then therefore not buying assets, and that dynamic, that causes the unemployment rate, that factor.
That's the sort of economic reasons. But in terms of the AI agents, robotics being able to replace you, I've sat with Dara from Uber, and Dara said that he imagines in the future, the 9 million riders that they have around the world doing deliveries will be replaced by autonomous vehicles, autonomous robots. Those 9 million drivers those careers that you have will be out of work conceivably. Talking about being honest about the situation.
Yeah, I think, again, it goes to physical AI as well, right? So I think 20 years from now, you can imagine that those 9 million will be 20 million AVs maybe. But we have time between now and then, partially because we don't operate in the virtual world, right? We operate in the physical world. You have to get the regulations up. You have to build the cars. You have to build the sensor stacks. The models have to get there. So there is time between now and then, but you can imagine the majority of our trips being fulfilled by robots of some kind.
The unemployment rate gets very influenced by the bubble bursting and the economy going down. You see that spike.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly have the evolutionary change that you're referring to.
Okay, so it's both.
In other words, there's this evolutionary thing in which they, like he says, the tractor replaces the laborer, or the assembly line worker as technology is replaced. And that is an evolutionary thing that goes continuously for, many years in the way that you're describing. Because you asked about the unemployment rate, I just wanted to emphasize that the unemployment rate is very heavily affected by that bubble bursting.
So, okay, you've got two forces at once then. You've got when the bubble bursts, everybody, as we said, needs cash. So they start cutting their costs. So that's when they start laying people off.
Yeah.
And they start looking around their company and go, forget growth, we just need to survive. So we're going to lay off that team and that team and that team. And then you see unemployment going up. And then you've got this sort of underlying shift happening at the same time, which is workers are replacing their team members with AI agents or robotics, or in the factories, they're now using robots to do factory work, etc. And that's the sort of current slow march forward.
Right. So I have this chart, okay? What this represents, this line, is the evolution of technologies. In other words, we have greater and greater learning and doing things better, and that's the evolution that we're talking about, that also machines replace people or replace their tags over that period of time. Then you have this big cycle, which is typically lasts for about a lifetime on average, about 80 years. We went through that last time, 1945. There are orders. There's a monetary order. There's a domestic political order. There's a geopolitical order. Okay. You have the bubble bursting. Okay. You have this. This is what we're talking about, that dive. And then when you go through that, you break down these orders. And when they break down, then you would get rid of the debt burden. So you get rid of the monetary system as you're used to it. You may get rid of the domestic order. Many countries' orders, their systems end. I mean, they all end at some point. And so they can break down quite often in a time of great internal conflict. Does the system last? And that happens at that time. And so that's that big breakdown. But still, what you're talking about is, and I agree with this keeps going up, okay? Because learning, you don't unlearn what you've learned. So as this goes up and you still keep this thing going up, okay? But you have the big cycle, the debt, the conflict type of movement. And these little cycles are the cycles that we see in this roughly on average, let's call it an 80-year period. But you see the recession, and recession has higher unemployment and so on. Then they stimulate monetary policy. They make money looser. Then the economy goes up and you have prosperity. Then you go into a bubble, okay, and you run lower on capacity because you're using up the capacity. Inflation rises. They tighten monetary policy. And then you have the recession that follows. So these movements from one recession to the next recession, that cycle that I've just described, on average has lasted about 6 years, and give or take about 3. So that's the way it looks.
So I'll play this back to make sure I understand it. There is a sort of bigger macro bubble, which is over 80 years, which is the changing of the world order.
Yep. You get deeper and deeper and deeper in debt over a lifetime. So let's say your debt capacity, you have a certain amount. So the government's debt capacity, for example, it can borrow. When you wipe it out here, then you can build it up until it starts to squeeze. Debt service starts to squeeze out.
And that's a changing of the world order.
That is one of the ingredients, right? So, okay, we have too much debt. At the same time, what you're building up is you're building up great wealth gaps, because capitalism, and I love capitalism, but here's the reality. It creates big differences in income and wealth. And when it does that, that also creates differences in people's opportunities, because the rich people can educate their children well. well, and they can give them all the benefits. I mean, education is a big benefit, and that's why there should be broad-based, excellent education. But all of that happens, and so you see wealth gaps build up. So like the Industrial Revolution leads into the Gilded Age, okay? The Gilded Age looks a lot like now, people buying expensive things and looking very gilded. And then it leads to the robber baron, and the robber barons are people who are considered, that they're taking advantage, the billionaire class, and it becomes that cycle. So that's the way it works.
So you've got this 80-year sort of, boom, and then there's a collapse, which sort of ends in conflict and the changing of the New World Order. And then within there, you have these little bubbles, which are really economic bubbles that go up and down, recession. People get very excited, they contract, they get excited, they contract. And then you have the straight line here, which is the sort of technological improvement across the spectrum of ideas and technologies and all these things.
It keeps going.
And it keeps going regardless of this boom and bust, because as you say, people never forget. So a couple of questions on this then. I don't even know which one to dive into first, but let's go for, I guess, just closing off on the last point that I was getting at is there's this narrative that there'll be new jobs created because of AI and robotics and everyone will be fine. A lot of this narrative comes from Silicon Valley.
Who is producing the technology that doesn't want to be attacked because they're
making a lot of money.
They may have
and they're in the Gilded Age.
Desire to have a certain perspective. I think objective people in Silicon Valley, and there are a number of them, would say it's going to have a big employment. But you can see it in the wealth. Who owns stocks and who doesn't own stock? Okay. Now, if you own stocks, you're very happy now. Okay. And if you don't own stocks, you're not getting that benefit of owning stocks. So that in and of itself creates a greater wealth, even aside from employment. Okay. So there are these forces to create the greater wealth gaps, right?
Roughly 61% of US adults own stock in some form, and most of them hold it indirectly through their retirement plan. Only 20% of Americans directly own individual stocks or shares through a brokerage account, while over half of Americans own stocks. Ownership is heavily concentrated. The top 10% of households hold almost 90% of the stock. How do you feel about this narrative coming from predominantly Silicon Valley that there'll be new jobs created that we can't yet forecast and everyone will be fine? They point to the Industrial Revolution. They say, look, when the tractors came, we thought everyone was finished. When factories came, we thought everyone was finished. But look, we figured some other stuff out.
Because if you look at that, this thing I'm saying, that as your body is more and more replaced with your mind, then you can do that. But when your mind is replaced and your body is replaced, what is it that you have to sell?
What is it that we have to sell as humans once our body and our minds are replaced?
What man has is emotions and has intuitions. There's certain things that artificial intelligence doesn't have. And so if you have to get down to what those things are, does the robot give a good massage? Does, what is it that is left? And so we will wrestle with what it is that is left, okay? But I think that for the foreseeable future, those who can work very well where they have an exceptional human intelligence and work in partnership with the artificial intelligence, that they are going to be a cutting edge of all of this.
So if you had kids that were 16 years old now, Ray, and they said, Dad, what do you think, based on everything you know about the future, what should I be doing?
First of all, there's the question of what matters most in your lifestyle. So I'm going to get philosophical, not assuming that the highest income is the best, okay? Because happiness, you want happiness and health. And so in answering your question, there's very little correlation between the amount of money you have and the level of happiness that you have past the basic level. And so I could answer your question first, which the obvious way is to say to earn the most amount of money. And I want to start off in saying that, my experiences and so on is like I love being in nature and it doesn't cost me hardly anything. I mean, it depends where your pull is. And so don't lose sight of your pull and what it's about. What you want to do is you want to get above the level that you don't have panic. We just earlier discussed how many months can I live, and to be able to secure that and to be excited and have that passion or whatever it is, the life that I want to have. So I just want to emphasize, keep in mind of that. But then also, my principle is make your work and your passion the same thing, and don't forget about the money part, right? So know your nature. This is what I tell my grandkids, okay? Yeah, you have a field and you also have a nature. It's not just your preferences. People think differently. Some are more adventurous. Some are less adventurous. Some are more conceptual or artistic and can think with imagination, and they love doing that. Some people don't like that. Some people want to make life should be more concrete and more certain and so on. That's your nature. You're a lot born with that nature, and you also learn it in your earlier years. We know this of how neuroplasticity works and so on. So we are all on a journey to find the match between our nature and our path. And you find that path, but you can't forget about this money part
So
while
on that
you're
point,
pursuing that path.
don't forget about the money. So if your grandkids came to you and they said, I want to become a lawyer, would you say, listen, that's forgetting about the money because I think AI might take that job? Or would you say yes? They said, I want to be,
I think
I want to do a thinking job.
let me say that history has shown that it's not the most intelligent people or the most intelligent species that are the most successful. And it's not necessarily those that work the hardest, although these things are very important. It is those who species and people who are also most adaptable. And so there's going to be great change in your lifetime. Okay. And so, yes, today it's artificial intelligence. But if you went back not long ago, we didn't even know artificial intelligence would exist the way artificial intelligence today exists. And the future will be like that. So when you're nailing it down, it used to be make sure that you know how to code. And then Claude Code comes along, and all of those who are coding are worried about their job. Okay. So what is it that matters? Okay. It is the approach to life in a sense that produces that, the general understanding and also the adaptability. I think a lot has to do with knowing yourself. That's why in building Bridgewater, the personalities of the person were very important in what suited their jobs. And then I built this a personality profile test. Then I made it online for anybody to go take. It's about 30 minutes. It's free online. It's called Principles U. That'll tell you a lot about your nature. Okay. But your goal is to find that nature and what are the paths. And there are several paths, and they're constantly changing to find that nature. Okay. You'd experiment, you learn. Okay. But you probably were pulled into this job by your nature, right? And so, and you made it work. And here it is. It works in all of those dimensions. And it's like that for everybody.
Yeah, it's interesting because you look forward to the future. And I think if I was a young person at this stage and I was trying to set out where to aim my career, I would be more confused now than ever before, especially because they're also contending with this unemployability crisis amongst entry levels.
But if you're talking about you'd be confused because you can't anticipate the future, that's right. That's just the way it is, right? And if you say, what is it that I need given that reality? Okay, I need to learn. I need to know how to maximize the use of tools like AI to be able to increase what I know, and how do I use that to the best of my ability to be as useful as possible doing things that fulfill me.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's what you need to do. You're asking what you need to do. Just get over the fact that you don't know what the future is going to be like. So if you're looking for an answer, is it going to be a computer programmer? Is it going to be this or that? No, just maximize your ability to know, which is so easy to do nowadays, right? So maximize that, and then use that to maximize your usefulness and jobs that make you happy. And that's the thing that's the best I can give you in terms of more my 16-year-old. That's the best I can give them, because I don't want to mislead them that it's the thing, that it's the particular job. Okay. That'll mislead them.
You talked about this 80-year cycle, which results in this new world order. And it sounded like you were saying that near the end of the cycle, you see wealth inequality and you see the Gilded Age, where some people have lots of nice things and other people at the other end are struggling. And this is a function of capitalism.
First of all, it's a reality that it's not only just a wealth gap difference. And if the majority system is not working for the majority, well, you're going to have a problem. And yes, it is. It's contributed to these things where one wants to create more opportunity through education and through other basics, that there's certain level at a floor that nobody should go underneath because it's bad for them and it's bad for the society. And just to embellish on that point, my wife and I live in Connecticut. It's on a per capita income basis, I think it's the second richest state, but 22% of the high school students have either dropped out of high school or are failing with absentee rates of greater than 25%. And as a result, a lot of it is gangs, shootings, drugs, and so on, that leads to a lot of incarcerations. And the bill for incarcerations has become larger than the education budget. When you have that kind of cycle and so on, the system has to work for most of the people. And so you have that dynamic, but it all comes down to productivity. And so the way I look at it is the government run by almost anybody can't make these things run well. I mean, governments do not things run well. So what is it like to give them the money and expect that they're going to make things work well? And so you look at this set of circumstances and you say, who is going to make it work well? And I don't know the answer. And these are budget considerations and so on. You have to prioritize the things that make it work well. And you know what that is? That is educating people to be productive and civil. We don't talk enough about civility, how we work together to be able to achieve a productive result. And the way these cycles go, it's more likely that they're going to have a big fight and we're going to have, a debt problem and those kinds of things than how we're going to come together and work out how to achieve this environment which takes care of wonderful education and productivity of people and all of that to make the society work better for most people. And that's the way it looks. And that's what's happened.
Capitalism leads to inequality, it seems.
Yeah,
so
it doesn't have to. There are some societies, like in Singapore, some of the Scandinavian countries, some societies, there is a floor that everybody can have good education, adequate housing, and adequate health care, the foundations, okay? Because if you go below those levels, the society will pay terribly for it because those people will become liabilities, not assets of the society. They'll be disruptive.
So what about wealth taxes? Because this is the big debate now. The big debate in the UK at the moment is tax the rich. It's been all over our news over the last couple of weeks. The big debate in New York and LA is wealth taxes and tax the rich. Good idea, bad idea?
It's a very difficult idea in the following ways. I'm just talking about the mechanic. They have to sell the wealth and that contributes to get the money to pay the taxes. That's one of those things that can cause the bubble to burst as we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And then operationally, it's very difficult, unlike if they did it as stepped up tax bases. In other words, right now, when you die, your capital gains gets put aside and you don't have to pay capital gains taxes, you pay inheritance tax. And there are ways that you
نرجع لنفس الجزء بتاع الليفرج اللي احنا كنا بنتكلم عليه. فاكر الجزء ده؟ فاكر لما احنا قلنا ان في طفل هيبقى معاه الليفرج ناحيته، يعني العصايه طويله هتبقى معاه، فباقل مجهود يقدر يطير الطفل التاني ده. فاكر الحته دي؟ طب لما تيجي تتكلم بقى على حكومه، تمام، قدام واحد راس مالي، عم تعالى نلبسه الطاقيه بتاعت الناس الاغنياء، مين اللي معاه الليفرج؟ الحكومه اقوى ولا الراجل اللي عنده شركات في الدوله ده اقوى؟ مين اقوى؟ مين اللي عنده اليد العليا؟ مين اللي معاه الليفرج؟ الشخص ده. يعني من الاخر سيادتك حبيت ان انت ترفع عليه الضرائب، ايه اللي هيحصل؟ الراجل هيباونس، يعني هيطلع بره الدوله، فيقوم مدخلك في نفس المشاكل اللي احنا كنا حكينا عليها، اللي هو هيقوم قافل الشغل بتاعه ويروح دوله تانية الضرايب فيها خفيف، فالناس تفقد الوظائف بتاعتها، فالناس ما يبقاش معاها دخل، فبالتالي الصرف بتاعها يقل، فبالتالي دخل الناس التانية يقل، وهكذا، فالاقتصاد يقع. فدايما لما تبص لحاجه بص لها من النظرتين، هتقوم قايل لا ما هو غلط ومش صح ان الناس الاغنياء يفضلوا اغنياء واحنا الناس الفقيره اللي تدفع تاكسز او ضرايب، بس المفروض الناس الاغنياء دي بتعمل فلوس اكتر تدفع ضرايب. طيب سؤالي ليه، انت ليه بتبص على نص الكوبايه الفاضي؟ يعني ليه انت لما يكون عندك كوبايه كده مليانه للنص سيادتك مركز في الحته دي اللي هي الفاضيه وسايب الجزء المليان؟ يعني ايه؟ مش الناس الاغنياء ما بتدفعش ضرايب او ليهم الطرق بتاعتهم ان هم يقللوا الضرايب؟ طب ما تخليه غني زيهم، اعرف هم بيعملوها ازاي واعملها زيهم. لكن طول ما انت بتشتكي وقاعد بتقول لي الناس الاغنياء ما بيدفعوش ضرايب واحنا بس اللي بندفع ضرايب مش عارف ايه، عمرك ما هتكسب في اللعبه. والمثال بتاعنا اللي بنقوله كل مره، لما يبقى عندك رقع الشطرنج وانت بتلعب الشطرنج ده القواعد واحده على كله، فالعسكري اللي عندك هنا بيطلع خطوه لقدام، ما ينفعش تقول لا انا مش عاجبني القواعد دي، انا عايز العسكري زي ما بيطلع خطوه يرجع خطوه. لا، مش في ايدك، انت في ايدك اللي انت تلعب اللعبه بالقواعد بتاعتها وتكسب فيها. طيب سيادتك لما تبقى مسؤول وتبقى عارف انت اللي تحط قواعد، ما ينفعش تحط قاعده تخسرك. يعني انت لو حطيت القاعده دي ورفعت الضرايب، ايه مين اللي هيطلع كسبان ومين اللي هيطلع خسران في اللعبه؟ انت اللي هتخسر اكتر من التاني. ليه؟ علشان الليفرج في صالحه، هو اللي يقدر يلوي دراع سيادتك ويقوم قايل خلاص يعني مش عايز اشتغل في البلد دي واروح اشتغل في اي حته تانية، فبالتالي انت خرجت الفلوس من البلد بتاعتك اللي انت بتحاول تصلحها، انت بوظت الاقتصاد اكتر. وكمان الناس اللي هي كانت بتفكر تيجي عندك لما تلاقيك بتعامل الناس اللي هي الكابيتاليست او الراسماليين بالطريقه دي، هل هيجوا يستثمروا عندك؟ لا. يبقى انت هربت الفلوس من البلد بتاعتك، خرجتها بره البلد، وكمان طفشت الاستثمارات اللي كانت هتخش لك لمجرد ايه؟ ان انت مش عارف انت مكانك فين. انت فاكر اللي انت قاعد هنا لكن انت قاعد الناحيه الثانيه. وزي ما المثل الامريكي بيقول ايه ماني توكس، يعني من الاخر فلوس هي اللي بتتكلم. الشخص ده معاه فلوس فهو اللي معاه الادفانتج وهو اللي معاه الميزه التنافسيه اللي انتوا لو لعبتوا مع بعض جيم مين اللي هيطلع كسبان؟ الراجل الغني هو اللي هيطلع كسبان.
Can raise taxes and not hurt the economy. But we do have to realize that it will lessen investment because what wealth is mostly used for is to put it into investment. So you have to do this with at the same time, the improvements in those that are going to improve productivity, like education and so on. If you're just making transfer payments, wealth payments, and you undermine the productivity of the society by doing that, in other words, you're just giving it for consumption and so on, and the money's going from what was capital expenditures and those kinds of investments that make a better, more productive society to go to, in a sense, consumption and so on that doesn't produce that productivity. That's going to be a problem. So you have to think, how do you make people productive and how do you make your society productive for most people? Or you're going to have to find a way where you say that other group of people who is not productive, the overall society can have a higher level of productivity, but we're going to still establish this bottom that I'm talking about, the bottom in education, the bottom in condition. And then you have to say who is capable of doing it, building a society that will be productive.
And who is that?
Well, as I say, you have this dynamic problem that typically a privately owned, capitalist-owned business will do better than their government counterpart.
Okay, so a business is more productive typically than a government entity.
That's system.
So entrepreneurship. You need entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and capitalists. In other words, people who are capable of making the thing they're responsible for productive. Okay, run efficiently. So you need those indisputably. And if you're doing that in government, you need that in government in order to be able to do it. And government has its own. First of all, it doesn't attract many of those people, and then it also has, by its nature, knowing many people have gone into it, it is almost dysfunctional as it causes all of this arguing and problems. So those who want to be most productive tend not to go there. And also, it doesn't distribute well. These people they're not on the ground. They don't have the direct contact. They don't know what it's like. And as I'm describing, I see this
politicians.
The politician who says, I'm going to, so you still have to come back to the question, who's going to make it run efficient?
Because there's this problem, you said there's not enough money. The most popular narrative, which I think is supported by about 70% of people, is that people over 10 million net worth, this is something proposed by one of my former guests, Gary Stevenson, who did a documentary last week, should have a 2% wealth tax.
My preferred way is to stop people from hoarding enormous amounts of wealth for enormous amounts of time. That's basically my preferred method. There's also the wealth tax method. There's also capital gains as a method. There's a lot of different ways here. But you have to deal with the problem of, if you do not tax very wealthy individuals and very wealthy families, their share of the pie will obviously grow over time, and they are, as we are watching, squeezing out ordinary families.
And this is kind of, it would raise, I think they said $20 billion or something like that, but it would raise some money. So the big debate in the country at the moment is, one way to raise money would be this wealth tax. Opponents of that, or I should say, people that are against that, say people will leave.
If you took all of the money of people in the top, not in other words, taxed at 100%, you're not going to come up with enough money because it's such a small percentage of the population. But in addition, yes, the people will leave. Then you change the laws so that you make them
تعمل لها فانلينج تاني، هي هتطلع تاني للناس الاغنياء. لو سيادتك بصيت معايا كده، ايه اللي حصل في 2019؟ كورونا، صح؟ دي تسببت اللي الناس قعدت في البيوت بتاعتها، فالناس ما عادتش بتشتغل والاقتصاد بدأ يقع. فامريكا قامت عامله ايه؟ نزلت للناس شيك فيزي ب $1200. يعني ايه؟ يعني الناس نزل لها كل واحد $1200. طيب ما انت بقى بالنسبه لك دلوقتي، ما يا عم ده دوله عادله جدا، وزعت الفلوس ايه، وبياخدوا بالهم من الناس الفقيره وبتاع. الفلوس دي راحت فين؟ لو انت بقى فكرت كده، الفلوس دي راحت فين؟ الناس العاديه راحت واشترت بالفلوس. فمين اللي كسب؟ اصحاب البيزنس، اللي هم مين؟ الويلسي، اللي سيادتك عايز تاخد منهم تاكس او عايز تاخد منهم ضرايب. يعني امازون شافت اعلى طلبات في التاريخ في 2019 وحققت اعلى ارباح في التاريخ بتاعها في 2019. طيب الذكي من الناس دي، الناس اللي هي الاذكياء بقى، خدت ال $1200 عملت ايه؟ قالت لا انا مش هصرفهم في حاجه استهلاكيه، انا ذكي، انا هعمل ايه؟ هستثمر. فبالتالي ايه تاني حاجه زادت؟ الناس راحت اشترت في الاصول، يعني راحت اشترت مثلا اسهم شركات واشترت ذهب وعقارات وغيره. طب مين اللي يمتلك اصلا الاصول دي؟ برضه الناس الاغنياء. فبالتالي الثروه بتاعتهم زادت. فمهما كان سيادتك عملت ايه وخدت الفلوس بتاعت الناس الاغنياء دي كلها وقمت موزعها على الناس الفقيره، كده كده هترجع لايديهم تاني. سواء سيادتك هتستخدم المنتجات او الخدمات اللي هم بيعملوها، يا اما سيادتك هتستثمرها وهتشتري اصول، والاصول دي الناس الاغنياء برضه هم اللي يمتلكوها. يمتلكوه. فدي فكره خاطئه عند الناس، اللي هو خلي الناس الاغنياء تدفع ضرائب، او خد الفلوس بتاعه الناس الاغنياء واعمل ريديستريبيوشن او اعاده توزيع للثروات للناس الفقيره تاني، علشان دول نهبوا البلد ومش عارف ايه. فيش الكلام ده. ما تقدرش اللي انت تكمل في لعبه وانت بتلعبها مع واحد علشان انت اقوى منه. ليه؟ علشان هو اذكى منك، فانت حتى لو كسبته المره دي هو هيكسبك المره اللي بعدها او اللي بعدها واللي بعدها. بلس بقى اللي احنا قلنا اصلا اللي انت مش اقوى منه، يعني هو اذكى منك وكمان اقوى منك. الليفرج موجود في صالح، هو اللي يقدر يخلع من البلد بتاعتك ويقوم رايح فين؟ يروح لاي حته تانية فيها تسهيلات. هترفع الضرايب في اليوكي، الناس ما عادتش هتبقى موجوده هناك، وهتقوم سايبه البلد وتروح لبلد تانية، تروح تفتح البيزنس بتاعها في اي بلد تانية يكون الضرايب فيها قليله او يكون فيها تسهيلات، وتكون الحكومه والبلد بتعاملهم بطريقه كويسه. ليه؟ علشان هو معاه الادفانتج ومعاه الفلوس، يعرف ينط من هنا لهنا ويفتح في اي حته. فمين اللي هيتضرر في الاخر؟ الشعب نفسه اللي هيفقد الوظيفه بتاعته، اللي الدخل بتاعه هيقل، فبالتالي مش هيصرف اكتر، فبالتالي واحد تاني هيخسر اكتر، فبالتالي هيقوم طارد ناس اكتر، وهكذا. ليه؟ علشان الفلوس ما عادتش بتتحرك من ايد لايد.
Active. In other words, you say the law means you're going to be taxed as of past date, so that if you leave, we're going to get your money. Or then you put in capital controls. All of this has happened before. Wealth taxes would be new. Wealth taxes are administratively difficult because how do you value all this wealth that is not easily valued in such things? But yes, what you've just said is well recognized.
You mentioned earlier that this big cycle takes place, this one here on the front of your book, The Changing World Order, happens roughly every 80 years.
Yes, it's like health. What I mean is it varies. On average, let's say, what is the life expectancy of a person? But life expectancies or how long people live vary. I wouldn't emphasize too much the amount of time exactly, as much as I would look at your condition.
Where are we in this at the moment in terms of the symptoms or markers of the next big collapse?
We're over in this vicinity over here. We're on the, when we say that the US, the UK, number of other countries are later in that cycle when there's the loss of the things that we've been talking about. Over-indebtedness, more over-indebtedness, the loss of power.
So we're in the collapse period of the decline.
Yeah, the decline. I'll call that the decline.
And you've studied this for how long? In terms of
500 years, the cycles for 500 years and in a number of countries. It's in that book. These are objective measures. This is not subjectivity. You can measure these things. You can measure the level of indebtedness. You can measure the education levels and the competitiveness. You can measure all these things in clearly measurable numbers.
Ray, thank you so much for committing this season of your life to being more of a public educator, because your books here that have been read by millions and millions of people, and the videos that you produce that have been watched by tens and tens, hundreds of millions of people have been so formative for so many of us understanding the world in simplified ways.